I have a friend up here. His dad told him books are lighter than bricks.
Yes, they are. And I've done that as well, tossing bricks up for the masonry up at the top, right?
Welcome to Manufacturing Mavericks, the podcast that introduces listeners to the people who are driving advanced manufacturing to new heights. Powered by the Barnes Global Advisors, Manufacturing Mavericks host John Barnes and his guests explore the opportunities and challenges of AM, sharing thoughts on industry trends, breakthroughs, and leadership, while sprinkling the conversation with doses of life lessons and dad jokes. Now here's your host, TBGA founder, John Barnes.
Hey there, and welcome to Manufacturing Mavericks from TBGA. I'm glad you're joining us. Each episode, we shine a spotlight on the people pushing the boundaries of advanced manufacturing. We explore the edge of technology, dive into economics, issues, trends, and critical ideas driving forward, with a special emphasis on the exciting world of additive manufacturing. From new tech breakthroughs and industry trends, especially in additive manufacturing, to the everyday challenges people face on the job. We know there's more to work than just work, so we dig into leadership stories, life lessons, and the quirks that make this field fun. And yes, you can count on some dad jokes and puns along the way because what's a show without a little groaning? Thanks for tuning in. Let's go ahead and get into it and meet the people who are making manufacturing what it is today. I'm John Barnes. I'll be the host. I'm the founder of Barnes Global Advisors and Metal Powder Works. I'm a materials engineer. I've got two daughters and two golden retrievers. Joining me today is Adele Ratcliff. She has just retired from a distinguished career supporting the nation and our troops. Before we jump into that, Adele, what did the grape say when it got stepped on?
I don't know.
Nothing. It just let out a little whine.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I thought that would seem to be appropriate. Well, thanks for being here. We've talked about this for probably on and off for about a year, and now we've got plenty of fresh air in front of us, so we can do it. I think one of the things that's so interesting, we'll get into this in more detail. So, this mechanical engineering background from Mississippi State, and I think you said it was a marine emphasis, which is kind of interesting given the arc of, from where you started to like how we came into reconnected. And so I think a million years ago, as a younger engineer at Lockheed, I worked on a project looking at NINs and figuring out which ones would be 3D printable. And that was like 2005, which I think was somewhere in your portfolio. But yeah, so let's talk about your background a little bit. You're from Mississippi. You grew up in Mississippi. You got a mechanical engineering degree with a marine emphasis. What does that mean?
Yeah, so one, Hell State, go Dogs, Mississippi State. I'd say my college career was it was a lot like my other portions of postgraduate. I was kind of like a drunken sailor around a wobbly line there. I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I found some things a little bit more difficult in my early portions of my career in school. And so, and that was in the days of the chalkboard and before a lot of the capabilities that we have been able to advance for kids today, which is really important to what our discussion is today. Hands-on applications that would have made me a better engineer. But as my dad planted a flag and said, enough, you must select your final, this is your final choice of majors. I tripped across a major called marine engineering, which was really the construction of boats. There was a large shipyard, Ingalls Shipyard at the time, the largest shipyard in the nation at the time that was building boats, and they had a feeder program. So I went in and spoke to the advisor about some basics about the program. I had been working road construction during the summer times, and so I knew I like to do things. I like to build things. And so it just was really appealing to be able to now work on big things, to go build big boats at the largest shipyard. So, I worked for a small shipyard in Florida the summer before I graduated. I realized, hey, I'm from a landlocked county in Mississippi, and I've never even been in a shipyard, much less seen a boat being built. So, rang up a person who had graduated from the program, and they brought me on as a tack welder during the summer. So I tack welded all summer in a small shipyard. And when I graduated, they offered me a job, and I went there.
Was there anything that drew you to marine engineering? Or?
Yeah, it was the building of big things.
Okay.
These are big,
Very
Ingalls
big.
was building really big boats. And again, for somebody who was from a landlocked county in Mississippi, to the idea of being able to stay, in my state and go down and work in the largest shipyard in the nation just seemed to work on building big things seemed really appealing. It was outside wouldn't have to wear a dress and wear a suit. So it was a lot of things that appealed to me, and I would get to make things.
And I thought it was interesting. You actually did some tack welding, which, I don't know today if a lot of junior engineers would would be willing to do, but we were just talking before we started, like sometimes, there's putting in the work is a great way to learn. And I think you had a quote about this, where you were talking about your experience with Eglin, but I'll let you say it, but it was, learn how to do hard early.
Yeah, I think the ability to go off and do hard things early just develops resiliency in you. And the other thing is life doesn't get easier as we age. And so early on, we all are faced with decisions early on about, what kind of life do we want in the future? And I wanted to be an engineer. It wasn't going to be easy. And it certainly wasn't easy once I got into college. I graduated from a high school that didn't have computers in it. There was 69 in my graduating class, and we played football against people who had literally 4 people in their graduating class. That was a rural school. And then I went to a university that the sheer size of that university had more people in it than my hometown. And so these were a lot of adjustments that I had to make, and I didn't do them well early on. I've gone back and I've done some work with Mississippi State, and they've talked to me about, hey, I'm a professor. And I'm like, are you kidding me? If I applied for this school, you wouldn't accept me. That was how bad my transcript was early on. You have to persevere and overcome. And so the decision you have to make is, am I going to do hard now so that I get an easier way forward? Or am I going to defer hard for different choices during your school career or otherwise, and then life just gets harder. You can only work so long with your body, right? You have to start to work with your mind if you really want to earn an income out there. And I wanted it, and the beautiful thing about engineering was it allowed me to do both. It allowed me to be out in the world, to build things, and use my mind to solve problems. And that was appealing to me, even if I didn't fully understand what engineering was going to be about, that the basic premise of what it had to offer. And I thought it could unlock the world for me, and it did.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend up here. His dad told him books are lighter than bricks.
Yes, they are. And I've done that as well, tossing bricks up for the masonry up at the top, right? So, yes, and that probably kept me honest on my engineering courses as well, because as soon as I was tired of the spring semester, summer would come and I'd go enthusiastically work for road construction, where at times I would shovel in asphalt that was 350 degrees and 100% humidity and a 100-degree day in Mississippi. And by the dog days of August, I was ready to go back to school. So, it was a nice yin yang for what I was going through. But it also taught me a lot. I learned engineering, surveying, and other things in that road construction days. And then later as that tack welder. And that tack welder experience really comes back now and the latter parts of my career at the DoD in terms of what we were working on in terms of workforce development, the need to be able to regrow the trades. Helping the ship industry and the submarine industry. There was a lot of relationship to that I found very satisfying in the end.
Yeah, I think these odd jobs, and I don't know whether it's more likely or less likely to have these odd jobs, but like I remember like my summer jobs. I mean, I worked at an electronics store, I worked at a running store, but I would also like pick up like counting stuff. Like a friend was an accountant, so I did stock take for somebody, and it was like, a mindless job that you did all day in a warehouse, and it was like, you get a little silly with it towards the end. You're like 35 brown thingies with eyeballs on it, stuff that was being sold at a convenience store type stuff. But, I knew it helped shape what I really didn't want to do. Like I had zero interest in that. I had zero interest in where it was headed. I mean, I was going to do a good job on it because we were being paid. So there was a little bit of that. It might be worth just taking a one step back and just like tell us about like you just stepped out of a pretty big thing. You just retired. Congratulations again for that. And what was that last role at IBAS, and maybe just give us a brief synopsis of what that looked like.
Right. So the Department of Defense, now Department of War, has 2 basic flagship programs that are used to build industrial base capacity and capabilities for national security. The one that most people are familiar with through COVID days is the Defense Production Act Title III program. And then the IBAS program, the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment program. And so in 2016, I had been the director of the OSD manufacturing technology program, where we grew that program and stood up what is now known as the Manufacturing USA Institutes underneath that program. We had been at building capacity for, about a decade by the time I got to the IBAS program, but I was asked to take over that program, stand and pivot it and grow it. And so at the beginning of that tenure in 2016, that was a $5 million program, which isn't very strategic. The authorities were very powerful and succinct, but they just hadn't been fully leveraged. And so by the time I departed, we had been able to show through a number of years the value of those authorities for the challenges that we faced in rebuilding industrial capacity for the DoD and the nation on things like workforce development for manufacturing. And it was more than $1 billion a year when I left in that time. We basically doubled our budget every year through the appropriations. And so it's quite satisfying, also very stressful, but we were able to do a lot of good things and lay the foundation for, I think, for things that will continue beyond my tenure, which is one of the leadership philosophies I believe in. You should have a vision big enough and bold enough that is beyond what you can achieve yourself, right? That requires other people to get involved and carry it forward. And I think we've laid good foundations in a number of things and created enough momentum that we should be able to build off of those.
Yeah, and I think that that's certainly probably one of the area where we're in strong alignment on a few of those data points. One, the investment in the industrial base, and also that the investment in people to be able to inherit these things and progress them. So that's here I know my team, they love to call me boss because they know it makes me cringe. And I'm like, coach is okay, but I don't need to be, you don't need to slander me like that. So I think one of the things that I found interesting was that, beyond, working in the shipyard and appreciating like those big things, you kind of went into something that was still, it was probably as complex as it was big. So a lot smaller in scale, but also very complex in terms of its integration. So you worked as first a flight test engineer and then a flight test manager. I think the way you describe that is that beyond the hardware is always late. I guess it kind of gave you the first impression of, maybe not your first impression of manufacturing, but an appreciation for manufacturing. Beyond, obviously, there was the shipyard piece of it. That was magnitude, size. How are you going to put this thing together? This was probably a little bit different, which was like piece parts coming together to make something, and then all of the various groups that actually had to contribute to the success of this thing, because there was a pilot, there was maintenance of the airplane, there was the thing that you're actually testing. How did that progression go for you? Was that I like the way you explained it earlier, was just like, well, this seems like it's going to be a good time.
Yeah. I've worked with people who have had these well thought out career paths, and they know exactly what they want to do and what year that they want to do it to achieve their long game. And I applaud those people that have that in them. I didn't. My career was built out of one necessity. I needed a job. I took a job, and then there was a time at the shipyard when the market was collapsing. And so I started looking for another job down the road at Eglin Air Force Base, and happened to use the old mimeograph map to go to every building and solicit a job, and eventually got lucky there and got a job as a test engineer. And so and that was a lot of fun. We were doing testing of the end effect, the terminal effects of weapons, how effective and kinetic they were. And that was a lot of fun. And then I got an offer to go over and be the test manager of an ACAT-2 program for the Air Force. It was when the DoD was moving into smart weapons, from ballistic dumb weapons that were just pickled off the aircraft and you let gravity did their job there or didn't, and moving into smart guided tail kits. And I had the chance to go work on one of those wind-corrected munitions dispenser at the time. And so it was a lot of fun. We were testing on B-52s and F-16s and flying back and forth across the country. But we ran into a couple of challenges in as you would expect in the development process. We had a manufacturing challenge on a potting issue that we had to run into. And as the flight test manager, we were always asked to predict what the schedule was going to look like and when we were going to be able to test. And my adage back then, kind of cheeky, was, hardware is always late. My test schedule is carved in water. And that was my exposure to manufacturing. It was just this thing that resulted in my system not being there on time. And I would watch the production guys go off to visit the suppliers and sort that out. But we had a great OEM that we worked with on resolving those issues. And ultimately, we worked through all of our challenges, whatever those happen to be, in good partnership with OEM on that, and filtered our weapon on time.
I think that's one of the things, for me, I like with my kids, they had 3D printers in school. And one of the things I liked about it was the printers represented a way of making something. And it was fascinating to watch because it was pretty clean. It was pretty safe, but there was no tangible connection to making anything, previously. And so to your point, like, it's not easy to make something like, as engineers, I worked on, different stuff. You'd make a drawing and just magically the drawing was going to get converted into actual hardware. But that wasn't always the case, especially on like challenging programs like F-22. You're trying to solve the problem while you're flying the airplane. That was what really highlighted to me, like, oh, well, there is something called manufacturing engineering. Like there's a step in between, like, okay, yeah, it's got to look like this at the end, but to get it to look like that, there's actually a bit of art and science that goes on, just to meet the drawing.
Right. Yeah, and during our Mantech days, before it was really cool to now focus on manufacturing, the DoD had settled into TRLs, right? That was boom, that, technology readiness levels, but there was no underpinning to those other than a definition. TRL 6, relevant environment. What does that mean? Had no relationship to the ability to make them at scale with predictability on performance and cost. Back then, we worked then to develop the MRL framework that would underpin the broader readiness level framework for technology maturity because of that disconnect just in that relationship. And what you outlined, we were, even back then, it was, the word was technology dominance. Technology dominance. We're going to be able to innovate here and make somewhere else and maintain our tech overmatch. And there was a decoupling from what we were talking about versus the underpinnings of what really, at the end of the day, makes that happen. It is manufacturing that converts someone else's idea to reality. If it's anything that's physical, it's what provides the confidence that we should fly, drive, or ride on something, an airplane, a bike, or a train, or a car that gets you from point A to point B. I mean, those, whether or vaccines or whatever, right? It is manufacturing that converts that idea to reality. Yet we had lost that relationship both as a nation and then in this race to be innovators and entrepreneurs, we largely left blank the underpinnings of how that happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting, things go through phases. I mean, they cycle, there's cycles. This is where I put my hands in the air a lot, but it's not necessarily a failing of anything. It was like a period of time where that was the thing. Because when I first got to work and I worked for an aircraft engine company, like we could design things that we had no way of making. Like you just couldn't hold the tolerance or make something with sharp enough an edge, or the cord was such that it was just not going to be manufacturable. Fast forward, 10 years, you could make things and designing them, but analyzing them was a challenge. So,
right.
just as you keep pushing the ball forward, it runs into other some foreseeable issues and some not foreseeable issues. So you were at OSD, so you went from the test manager gig, which sounds like it was pretty awesome. Like
It was.
I was involved with one flight test program and it was awesome. I remember rocking up to Edwards Air Force Base and it was like a bajillion degrees. It was July, just super hot. But I was just like, man, like everybody who's anybody has walked on this ground.
Yeah.
Flown this air.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun out there. I got to see that was in the height of the new aircraft coming out. Whenever I was testing out there, it was like, back then it was the B-2. You'd see the SR-71, which was fielded, right? It was not in testing, but it would come out. NASA's shuttle would land out there. So you get hear it go through its double boom. The YF-22 and YF-23 were in competition. It was really good. It was a lot of fun out there. But Eglin, where I was from, also we had cool stuff. I mean, look, you want to go back and talk about manufacturing, watch a sled track test where you strap Zuni rocket motors onto a 1,000-pound bomb and sling it down the track and put it through 12 feet of concrete, right? That's what things have to be designed and made to endure at times. And so that was cool. Like I was sold the day I saw that. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm in for this job.
Kind of weird and wild, unique things. So I think that's where more of your focus, it seems to come from for the warfighter relevance. I mean, certainly that was very topical of the day, which was like, how does this impact the warfighter? And then you were telling me a story about wargaming, using logistics. And so logistics is kind of a proxy for manufacturing. You have to be able to make stuff, but you also be able to get the stuff wherever it needs to go. And that's probably then a prelude to the industrial base. So you were talking about, I don't want to do your quote here, but you're finding the white noise. So, going from very tactical, you had a fixed objective with the test program versus then kind of taking a step back and looking at the abstract saying, what other problems do we need to address that are probably a bit more challenging because it isn't just building a sled to go show that this thing can go through 12 feet of concrete.
Yeah, just to finish the discussion though on WCMD, because it would draw me later on. There was this discussion about needing support on working overtime on one of the aircraft, and I had asked the squadron commander if he would support that. He said no, because we're not at war, and I don't really think your challenges are insurmountable to be able to field on time. When we fielded that weapon on time in October, the next May I was up at OSD of 2001, and then in September of 2001, I was in London at the largest defense ground show in the world at the time when obviously 9/11 happened. That moment brought home that conversation, right? That our enemies never sleep and we should be urgent. We should not waste time. So when I came into the Mantech program, and then I was up at OSD and didn't have any money at the time, and there was this discussion about modeling, wargaming. There was a lot of wargaming on logistics provisioned assets, but they didn't tie that to the industrial base. And I started then, this is a decoupling of what you're at. How do you know that the industrial base is actually going to be able to meet your wartime footing if you do not relate that to the manufacturing, supply chain itself? And so we started that quest really to be able to do that in that dialogue, because it really wasn't being discussed, at least where I was hearing it, it wasn't being discussed. And so out in the manufacturing world, we started talking about that. And then that evolved into things later we had to move from analog 2D drawings, right, to be able to move into the digital domain. And back in that day, we couldn't even decide what we were going to call that digital domain. We started off calling it network-centric manufacturing because network-centric was the term that the DoD was using. And we were trying to provide some feel for manufacturing to people who weren't familiar with it, like in how this would relate to what they were doing and why they needed to care about it. And so from there, it migrated into the digital manufacturing and the design, the institute, and some other things that we've done to grow to where we really are today on that digital twin journey for manufacturing, and that complete integration from design, making, and feedback into the design product all the way through the machine tools and everything. 2 decades is a long time, but considering where we were when we started that process and how much we've accelerated, I'd say over the past 10 years, really 13 years, we've come a long way in 13 years in manufacturing here.
Yeah, I'd say that's for certain. I mean, like since I started working, like really the internet came in, we got email.
Yeah.
We went from entirely sort of, I mean, there was some CAD cam, that was a thing, but it was still very much a two-dimensional kind of opportunity. And
Yeah, I on your earlier podcast that you guys were talking about additive, and I was fascinated by this discussion because it was just in 2011 that we launched the first USA manufacturing, the Manufacturing USA Institute, now known as America Makes. Additive manufacturing was a promise, and we still have a long way to go, right? I still think you and I know that there are things to solve that you guys, you and Kevin talked about, but that's a lot of progress in a short amount of time for a technology that really we planted our flag on.
yeah, well, I mean, and we've talked about like even the efforts with the Navy right now, and their commitment to using additive, and that's it certainly goes with a certain amount of notice. Like that's a bet. I believe strongly that it's doable. We're going to do it, and not that it's easy, but let somebody else do easy. I'm
Yeah.
not worried about that. Nothing worthwhile is usually easy, and I think that's where and I'll see if you come up with your original quote, but we were talking about the white space, and so thinking about the going back to the TRL and how it's disconnected to manufacturing, but like then trying to motivate your team now to look for this white space
Yeah.
and how you did that.
Yeah, I call that ungoverned space. I live in the DC area, and a lot of people call many things like in our world, like watching a kid's soccer game, right? All the kids are just chasing to where the ball is. And that's interesting when you're six, but that's not really how we should be thinking about the battlefield of manufacturing. And so early on in the world of manufacturing and in Mantech and then later IBAS, what I tried to focus on were things that nobody was paying attention to, enterprise-wide issues that weren't getting any, that you would constantly in your walks across shop floors across America or in talking to programs, they would pop up, but nobody was addressing them because when everybody owns it, nobody owns it. The best way, in my opinion, at least for the programs that I ran, to try to create value was to go create value on things that were affecting everybody and nobody was paying attention to versus trying to go capture the flag that somebody else had planted, right? That's no good. Somebody's already got that issue under control. Go strip away the white noise and find out what's causing these problems and try to develop solutions that impact our industrial base at scale. That's how we did what we did on whether it was the institutes. We found things that people really weren't focused on, or TRLs, MRLs. Those later on, workforce development was one of those. Machine tools, people weren't paying attention to that. They really weren't paying to castings and forgings, and so we planted our flag on these just foundational industrial things, capabilities and capacities that affect all of us, but it didn't seem like anyone was really championing, at least not within the DoD.
And I think a lot of times some of that stuff is like there's good problems to solve and maybe there's maybe more tedious problems to solve, but it has to be a problem to be solved. What problem are you solving? Fundamental engineering problem. And I think then that's where the highlight comes in to say, well, this does require a solution. In the Navy's case with castings, again, it's related, right? There are multiple reasons. This is not a single point of failure; it's a multiple point of failure. And so, how do we alter that equation back to our advantage? And that's where typically this country's done a good job of inserting technology. We can't be afraid of technology. And that's sometimes I feel like we're still a little bit afraid of technology. If it doesn't show up as an app on your phone, it's kind of immediately too hard.
Yeah, I think the other thing too about technology or starting what problem you said we've got to solve a problem, right? We have another saying in our office, or did, right, is you know enough to start. You may not know everything, but you know enough to start. And so we started many things that we knew were problems, but we adjusted as we got more information to allow for our strategies to be more effective, right? So workforce is one of those. When I first started looking at that, there was a common problem. Just everyone said we don't have enough workforce. So you talk to communities about needing thousands of people, and the schools were putting out tens of people. And so I thought this was a supply, challenge. Well, there is a supply challenge, but it's on the left of the educational system. There's not enough people coming into it. And so as we started on modernizing schools and curricula and working to improve the output of that, we then had to work further left all the way back now into elementary school to kind of help to have a better chance at solving workforce for manufacturing for now and tomorrow. And so I'd say don't, in the oven governed space, when you're taking on problems that few people are addressing, start with what you have enough to act, but be willing to take other data as it comes along to inform what pivots you have to make to be able to get to your end game, which is whatever your problem you're really trying to solve. And don't be wedded to where you started.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because even in what we do, like I would say 90% of the time, we start a project with a company or an entity and try to be very clear about what success is going to look like. We know we'll be successful when blank. 10% of the time, though, we just accept that it's a good challenge, and we don't know where it's going to end up. But by virtue of studying it, it's a little bit the journey is the challenge. And so those are often frustrating, but also very rewarding projects to go down because, like if you don't start, you're never going to finish, even if you don't know what the finish looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing about those ungoverned spaces, and this applies to manufacturing and people that want to be in manufacturing, right? Or help in manufacturing, is that I wanted to create value for the programs that I was running. And the way to do that was to go help people that weren't being helped. There's a ton of problems to be solved out there that people aren't focused on. I found high value, components or portions of programs that had problems that just weren't being, no one was helping them with them. They were for some reason being overlooked in in the bigger machine due to bigger priorities, and applied our thinking and connections and modest investments that we had in the beginning to help solve problems for big issues, and success builds success. And so we built off of that to go create bigger efforts. And so that was another lesson through that process as well.
Yeah, and it seems to be there's a theme of again the white space. Let's go solve a problem for somebody. So I remember my team at Lockheed. It was just make a difference. Like go find somebody and help them out. We joke at TBGA oftentimes our unofficial slogan is first class solutions to first world problems. But occasionally you got to go attack the more mundane things that need to be resolved too.
Yeah. I mean, if you're on the road to go help somebody with a hubcap issue and you find somebody who's got a drop transmission on the side of the road, then I'm going to stop and provide help to them, because that's higher value, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And so I think the end game here is there's a lot of value in not fighting someone else in places where people are already highly competitive. There's a lot of opportunity in spaces that aren't being addressed that you can help real customers have real impact, and then create value for your company or your program or whatever it is that however you're working in the world.
Yeah, and I think that goes a long way with who are the people that, they may not be part of your organization, but you're aligned temporarily because helping the other group out is going to be good for both entities. And so I know I used to do that at Lockheed. There was projects that we'd work on, and I would go talk to the manager of a parallel group, different expertise. But I said, hey, if we can pool our resources, we can actually make a dent in this problem for that program. To me, that was always like, I guess common sense in hindsight, but not a lot of people were doing it either. To me, it was more entertaining because it was like, I'm going to learn a lot about what they do. They're going to learn what we do. We can certainly appreciate each other. They're never going to try to do what we do and vice versa. Like, I'm never going to be the low observables group, but if I learn how to make things for the low observables group, that's where we benefit from each other.
Yeah, I don't know how inside your company, right? But I felt if you go back to Freedom's Forge, right, there's a framework there that I've spoken about in terms of what I thought Arthur Herman does a nice job outlining what the industrial base did for us, and one of which is we had a sense of urgency, we had an existential threat, and while I didn't have an existential threat, I was running two programs that were really in a startup phase, so I had a lot of hustle. So I think that's the other thing, right? Having a little pressure on you to where you feel like you must succeed was good. Being in the crucible was good to go then drive me to find the things in white space that could create high value for people and programs that really needed impact.
So I think some of the things are, keeping people focused and not distracted because there's always something else that pops up. And, this is something that you and I have parallel opinions on. I always say like doing 10 things at 10% doesn't make it 100%. Where I think you were saying, don't pick 20 things, pick one or two and kind of stay on it. And that's a bit of a dogged determination. But I think also you seem to accumulate people who want to help you solve that problem along the way. And that's, I think, part of the fun in some ways, because you certainly, I think you expressed this earlier, like you learn a lot by surrounding yourself with other good people, even if they have a slightly different background.
Yeah, I mean, one on your momentum. When I took over IBAS, it was a $5 million program that would issue $1 million grants, on a data call per year, and I just didn't think that was strategic and could create huge impact for the industrial base. And so I chose then I'd rather and learned early on in the Mantech days better to make concentrated investments and narrow it doesn't mean that over time you can't expand what your focus area is, but you've got to pick one to two, maybe three priorities, depending on what your bandwidth and your funding is, to drive home and create success and momentum, to create impact so that success will build success to other things. And so that was one of the things that we chose. Once we planted our flag, we stayed there, created great value, pulled together people in the community, whether it's directed energy or other things, that had shared issues, but nobody was really helping them get organized and create value for them. That was the big thing. We're not creating value for us. We're creating value for them. And in creating value for them, it improved how people perceive the value of the program authorities. And so that was a lesson, right, in that process. And then that led to just, you always want to be a partner of first choice. You're not alone. Surround yourself by people who are better than you, that you would be willing to work for, because in this business, you never know when you will be working for them. The good thing about manufacturing this community, I think, is that we are surrounded by people who care and want to help. I think if you are willing to roll up your sleeves and invest in others and their causes, then they're willing to contribute in that cause as well, like as a community, and solve that problem. And I think those shared moments, those collective shared moments, then elevate all of us. The sum of the parts is greater than the whole, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts equation, right? That we're better off working together to solve this problem because we elevate our water line in a way that together that we couldn't solve it alone.
Yeah, and you mentioned this earlier, and it kind of follows thoughts that I'd had. No money kind of is equivalent to that's fine. Work with others to figure it out. That's actually that's not the root problem. And then there was a quote that I've always loved. I think it goes back to Linus Pauling, but it was like, lack of funding isn't a problem. Lack of good ideas is a problem. So coming up with ideas to solve problems, the money will come. You'll find people will gather, and generally those things tend to solve themselves.
I'd also add the ability to articulate the problem where people who are not from our space understand the value of that problem.
If there's one thing that if I've done nothing good in my however many years, I think because my parents weren't technical by nature. They're a history major and an English major. For me to describe what an engineer does to them, I was like, well, they're smart. But if I speak in jargon, it's not going to go anywhere. They don't care. And so that I always felt like I was the interpreter back to, the manager, the leader, whether it was briefing somebody at the Pentagon, general officers. Like, these guys are smart, but not all of them are engineers. Some are, but they all have college degree in something. And then really kind of painting it in something that's relevant to them is then the next piece of that puzzle. So I always find like technical people that can communicate a point, have a point, and then, as I'm not doing here, be succinct in delivering that point.
Yeah, when the building changed its terminology of what it was going to prioritize, whether it was warfighter relevance or something else from there. I used to have this saying that says, if my boss starts to prioritize sunflower seeds, I'm going to be able to communicate to my boss, my leader, how manufacturing helps sunflower seeds. And it's not that we're changing what we do. It's just changing how we communicate it to put it in terms of their issues, right? Their pinch points. Because, all right, you might change the yellow widgets that you make out the production line, but in the essence of what we do in manufacturing, that doesn't change, right? So communicate in a terminology of sunflower seeds for your boss. That's it's like, so
make it easy for them.
Yep.
And so I think that's a good transition to talk about a little bit the leadership thing, because of all the people that I know that know you, like, I think they would all use the word leader in a description. Now they may say a bunch of other things, but that's probably one thing that everybody would mention. And so we've had a lot of conversations about this. I think it kind of starts similarly to me, which is like, well, you know what bad looks like, so let's not do that. and so
Yeah.
is that really kind of where you shaped the beginnings of your leadership style? Like, hey, let's solve this problem, but I'm not going to do it in such a way that is toxic.
Yeah, when you're young, you view things differently in terms of what you need out of leadership. And probably what I thought were people that I didn't really value as a leader in hindsight might have been good leaders now if I look back on it. But I had one boss say, if you know what a bad leader looks like, don't do that. And then start with everything else. But the thing I think, you and I talked about before is that this was at a really changing time for me. My dad had died. I was headed down to an executive development program and wasn't really certain if I wanted to go. And one of the things that I had to do was a 360 evaluation. What came across is, hey, I was leading a program at the time. The Mantech program had no money, right? So it was just me and one person. No one really cared. I was dropped the coin down through the Pentagon, and as it bounced through the Keno machine, it landed in a desk at the lowest possible position, and that was me, right? One thing that came out of that evaluation, because this was during the don't ask, don't tell times, right? So even though I'm a civilian, it wasn't against the rules for me. I just felt like it wasn't good for me to talk about all of myself. So I was not as authentic and open and warm. Not that I'm warm now. I dropped like a sailor, words. But one thing that came out was like, look, they really good leadership potential, but we just don't know who she is. She comes a little cold, right? So that was two things for me in that moment, reading that. One, people perceive you as a leader regardless of your title.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your title that people view you as a leader or not. It's how they want to follow you.
Yeah. If you
Right?
want to lead, lead.
Right. Are you trustworthy? Are you dependable? Do you want to work for the common cause out there, right? That we believe in? Or if you draw your sword and say charge, like they want to go with you, you want to go with them. They're not alone in that charging moment. That was what I learned, right? That it's not your title. They're not following you for your title. You don't have to sit at the head of the table to be a leader. That was the first big one. The second one was you need to be your authentic self. Really need to be your authentic self. They need to know who you are as a person so that they can trust you, right? So that they can sit across the table, drink tea with you and get to know you so that they know whether or not they want to do a deal with you, whether that's a proposal with you, whether that's in business, join in partnership with each other, whatever that is, right? When they pick up the phone and say, I need some help, they're willing to go help you, or you're willing to go help them because you've sat around and you know each other. And those were two big things that came out of that for me.
Yeah, and I think, I've certainly had situations where, and first of all, I think like that's a struggle. That's not easily done. Being authentic, especially when you're supposed to be the boss, and there's everything you read about this stuff. So it's very much not easy or simple to do. And a little bit the vulnerability piece goes with that. And that's a metric of its own that is a challenge, especially for young managers. But anytime I sit down and I sense that somebody's not being authentic with me, I am like, okay, we're out of here, because I'm only going to be willing to share so much of what I have, because there's something. It's a little bit like that piece, you cast a longer shadow than you know, and so the authenticity piece. It's kind of credibility. It's a lot of things, and it's like if your vibe is not solid, people pick up on it.
And the environments we work in are highly competitive. So you need to anchor yourself. You need to understand what your own values are. A lot of us don't even go through that analysis. What do I value in myself, and what are my values that are going to guide me in my life, and then use those to help be authentic, right? So I wanted us to be the partner of first choice. That was one of my goals, that industry would seek us out and trust us, that they could communicate their challenge, and whether we could help them solve that problem or not, that they knew that we would try to do our best to point them to somebody who could. We didn't have to be the person who solved everything. We just wanted to be the person they came to first, and we would act in good faith with them in that moment. And if we couldn't help them, we just tell them, so we didn't waste anybody's time.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot that goes with that. And it doesn't certainly means that they don't need to know your favorite football team all the time, but
I wonder who that could be. Yeah, I think that, you and I share a mutual friend, and I mean, he's used the word love. I love Adele. Like, you guys had some difficult times, but because there was that mutual respect and understanding, you can get past that. Like, that's situational. It'll come, it'll go. And I think that's where I'm hopelessly optimistic noting I like to point out the difference between optimism and positivity, but optimism just being that you accept the reality of today, but the future can be better. But I'd like to think that hopefully we'll get to a point, talk about the kindness piece, and you don't have to get along with everybody. You don't have to work with everybody. You're not always going to align with everybody. Not today, but maybe tomorrow you will. But if you treat people with some base level of kindness and just a little bit of mutual respect, which is like, hey, we're here together. I respect that you're here. I'm not going to be a jerk to you. We're not going to work together in this thing right now. That's fine. Tomorrow, who knows? You never know. You can't make, not, I'm going to say enemies because, not too many people are making enemies these days. I mean, that's an overused expression. But to your point, you want people to come to you when there is a solution that you can help them out with.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be one. I'm a real an optimist with a touch of realism. I understand, like you, the dynamic that we're in, but I firmly believe that, look, I spent 36 years until last week, with the DoD badge hanging off my waist and that oath, and it drove me and made me a better person. And I believe in the principles that I grew up underneath, right? And I believe that manufacturing can help change people's lives. And therefore, in changing that person's life, they can change their family's life. And in doing so, it can help change communities' lives. We've seen this, I've witnessed this in communities just in my short tenure in manufacturing. So I believe in that cause. In terms of leadership and in our role that we play in it, I believed in hiring the best people that you could find, the best talent, unleash their talent, encourage dissension. I learned that in the program office, man. When you are fighting for a common cause, it's natural for tensions to happen because everybody cares. Those should not be personal. Like, it was the most beautiful thing that we had about our program office, man. Like, it would be some frustrating days in our stand-up meeting, right, with a lot of heated discussion. But at the end of the day, we were all on the same team, and we knew it. We were good because we had mutual respect for each person's role in that common goal, in that common charge. I've tried to take my experiences in that program office and encourage that in the teams that I've been able to lead. I want you and all that you are hired for, including all your technical background. Do not lead me down rabbit holes. Disagree, provide the data, let's go at it, and then we'll move out on a decision. And I think I've certainly felt enriched, and I think I hope that people who worked with me for the number of years that they did felt the same way, because it was a hugely rewarding opportunity to be in manufacturing and be able to learn from the best people out there.
Well, I would dare say that has been successful and will lead to future successes because it doesn't stop when you leave the building. So you've left a bit of a trajectory for other people to follow. For one, thank you for the 36 years worth of service, and then I'm fortunate that I don't know what we're going to do next, but something will pop up and we'll continue to do stuff together. And so I'm very happy about that. That's where my optimism, maybe that's where my optimism comes from. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure to be with you, both working with you in the past in the technical capacities, and to be on your podcast. I feel honored to have been asked so quickly after retirement. But I do. Whether we have to believe it or whatever, I believe that manufacturing is the best community in the country with the best people in it. And I just believe in what we're doing. And I think the more we get manufacturing right, the righter other things will be. And that's just how I feel about manufacturing, because that's how much I personally have been enriched through this community. And so for, however people listen to the podcast and wherever this goes, I just think, those that are in manufacturing, thank you, right? Thank you for being in your communities.
Cleared for takeoff.
You've been listening to Manufacturing Mavericks, hosted by John Barnes and powered by the Barnes Global